Welcome to the Volpe Report podcast, the state's premier public affairs show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians. I'm your host, Chuck Volpe. Join us now as we speak to this week's guest.
The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is brought to you by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We welcome you back to part two of a show that began last week with United States Senator Dave McCormick, who you'll remember sits on the Senate U.S. Foreign Relations Committee. Because of that fact, Dave has received top-secret classified briefings from the President, the Secretary of State Mark Rubio, the Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, the CIA Director John Radcliffe, as well as General Daniel Kane, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. You will also remember that I had referenced in the open last week that there's a revolution going on right now which has Iran, one of our enemies, on the verge of imminent collapse. This will also have a seismic aftershock in the geopolitical landscape of the world. On part two today, we will discuss the situation in Iran, what led to the uprising, as well as what all this means for the vacuum that will result in the world balance of power if, in fact, the Ayatollah and the mullahs have to flee to Russia.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial. The area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
I know we got a lot to talk about. If I could turn to Iran, Chuck, may I do so?
Wait.
May I do so? Because I think that as we're doing this tour of the world, that may be the single most significant thing that's happening. As you know, the Ayatollahs came to power in 1979. It's been a place that's posed enormous threat to the Middle East. It's been the provider of state-sponsored terrorism around the world. Hezbollah, Hamas, much of the terrorist activity that's happened has been financed by Iran. It's a huge oil state.
Dave, can I interject just a second,
Yeah.
just to give some context here? How long this imminent existential threat to America has been going around. I remember vividly coming home for Thanksgiving break in college. I was in my sophomore year. It was November of 1979. And a ho-hum day, of course, I lived in a time, kind of like you go back not quite as far, but three network we had ABC, NBC, CBS, and Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers. That was our no social media. I turned on the television, and on every station I turned, they were storming the United States Embassy in Tehran. And Ayatollah Khomeini, an evil, incarnate human being with the white turban on the head, was cheering him on and basically death to great Satan, death to America. That started a process, a domino, if you will. Of course, it resulted ultimately in the election of Ronald Reagan. But you draw a parallel. Our military attempts to intervene then were horrific. I could remember, again, turning on another TV and watching our helicopters crashed in the sand of the Middle East. They never even got to their target. It was a time of impotence and weakness in America. It resulted in the defeat of Jimmy Carter. But that's now almost 50 years ago. They have sponsored terrorism. They've killed Americans by the tens of thousands in different ways. So I just had to interject. I know how old I am, but that's one of those, I said, crease the memory. I remember where I was, what I was doing when that happened. That's who Iran is, for those of our audience that might be too young to remember that. Go ahead.
You're absolutely right. And the only thing I'd add to that is, and they subsequently became the greatest risk nuclear threat, because part of the way that they wanted to support their state-sponsored terrorism was to build a weapons-capable nuclear program, which we recently took out. So what you have in Iran is remarkable, because you have a similar kind of dynamic as Venezuela and Cuba, where the economy is failing the people. Sanctions and the behavior of Iran. This is a very well-educated population, and you have a growing discontent from the repression. You have a growing discontent from the economic challenges, and every now and then, over the last 5 or 6 years, there's been uprisings where the students have, particularly young people, have taken to the streets, and the government has cracked down and killed people. And that's what's happening now. There's a huge uprising, but this one's unprecedented. This happened during the Obama administration. And I think one of the most shameful chapters of the Obama administration was President Obama did not speak up for the freedom-loving, freedom-seeking people that were protesting in the streets. He kept silent. I've heard him actually say in an interview it's one of his greatest regrets. And what we see now is the combination of us, Israel, and the United States, really undermining and destroying much of Iran's capabilities. So the same pressures from the outside that we were describing in Venezuela and Cuba, you have sanctions that are putting these enormous pressures on the government, and you have the pressure from the inside. And that pressure from the inside, I think, is putting us in a situation where we very well may see the imminent collapse of Iran, just as we saw in our lifetimes the collapse of the Soviet Union. But I want to tell you just one story briefly, which will resonate with you. I've seen President Trump speak again and again. We stand behind. America stands behind those freedom-loving people. America stands behind those that are seeking freedom. America warns Iran, do not kill, do not terrorize your people. And it reminds me of something that is etched in my brain, creased in history, as you say. And it's Ronald Reagan in 1987, standing at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall and bring freedom to the people of the Soviet Union. Remember that?
I do.
It was one of the greatest speeches of all time. But here's the thing I want to tell you. Recently, I came across a biography. It was a very famous Soviet dissident. His name was Natan Sharansky. Remember that name? Sharansky.
I do not.
Very famous Russian dissident. And he said they were in the Russian gulag. And when the word came that Reagan had stood up at the Brandenburg Gate and supported their freedom, fight for your freedom, he said it went through cell by cell, whispering, America stands behind us. America stands behind freedom. I can't tell you how important it is to have a leader of the United States that's willing to stand up and say, we support those freedom-loving people. That doesn't mean we're going to send our military in tomorrow, but it means that we stand on the side of morality. We stand on the side of righteousness. And I think, with a little luck, we're going to see the overturn of the Iranian government and a real new chapter for the freedom of the Iranian people.
I was listening to a couple of points now that we are on Iran. Of course, the Crown Prince, Reza Pahlavi, the Crown Prince, in exile. I've seen him making the circuit on national media, so I've listened to what he said. And here's one of the interesting things that he said, a couple points. One is that it's not just the people in the streets. According to him, this movement, unlike other movements that were brutally crushed, has the support of not just the peasant workers, not just the government officials that make their government operate in their theocracy, a brutal theocracy, but this also has the support of the intelligentsia, if what Marx would have called the bourgeoisie, the owners, the storefronts, the people that provide the food and deliver services to the Iranian people are also supporting this. So you have a melting pot across all classes of Iran supporting this, maybe for the first time. And you made a wonderful point, Senator, and that is that, hope is a powerful thing. And, when oppression and when you're getting slaughtered, like at Tiananmen Square, for example, by the Chinese, they're rolling tanks over their own people. If you believe at some point you lose hope that we're just going to die and nothing's going to change, once you get a signal, like in that gulag you made reference to, well, now my life or death means something. An oath you took to defend this country when you charged that hill, when you were taking apart munitions for the infantry, in Iraq. All those things, the hope that now exists there, I believe. But there was a couple other things I said when I checked my notes. The other thing is, apparently, again, this is according to the Crown Prince, they are at DEFCON 1. They have a water crisis in Iran. And I don't remember a lot about how long you can live without food or drink. I remember this. You can get by with mineral and supplements for even 3 weeks as long as you have water. Without water, you got about 6 or 7 days. And people are going to start dying. So beside the oppression from the government, they are now crippled by economic sanctions. Their nuclear program is poof. They have very vulnerable oil reserves because they have no air force. Israel did that favor for us. So you would think if there's ever going to be a time in world history that the collapse could happen, all of those other factors, I'd like your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's it's one of those things. It's like Hemingway had this great line where he said, "Bankruptcy happens slowly, then quickly."
All at once, right.
Right, and then you don't, it's very hard to predict where the tipping point is. But I agree with you that it seems like you have this moment of these forces coming together, the legitimacy of the regime being challenged and questioned more than in our lifetimes, more than since the regime's come to place. And let's not forget the Ayatollah Khomeini is in his 80s.
86.
So the 80s. There's a number of factors that I think make this a moment where I could look to you and say, Chuck, I think it's highly unlikely that if we were in this conversation a year from now, that we wouldn't have seen some sort of remarkable transformation. But how and when it exactly happens is hard to know. And then how to play it from a U.S. foreign policy perspective post is also an open question, because in all these cases, I think we have to balance two things: a desire to help, support, push back on the forces of hatred and terror, lay the economic foundation that's going to be good for America and good for the country, and humility to know that these things have to sort of evolve, and there's got to be a lot of self-governance. And so two things are true. We need to have a unique model of engagement that I think President Trump's doing now. He's using the military in a very unique way. And we also have to remember the lessons, and these are very different. What happened in Iraq and Afghanistan are very different than these. I don't want to make a parallel, but the one thing we should have learned there is humility, and ongoing boots on the ground. America's interest on the ground have to be balanced with the chaos that often results in these post-war situations. So I've got a lot of confidence in the president's team. I think they're managing that beautifully in Venezuela. And if in fact we get to phase 2 in Iran, which I hope we will, that'll be the balancing act they'll have to strike.
Well, one final point on Iran. According to confidential sources, a bunch of the cleric mullahs have already left, and arrangements are made for, including the Ayatollahs, escape, safe haven to Russia, apparently is the destination that they would. So again, all of the indicia would seem to be there that the time is right. But and I want to go at one final point about, I don't think we can emphasize enough, beside all of the problems they're dealing with, a water shortage right now would be devastating.
Yeah.
Because now that affects everybody.
You raise a good point. I mean, we could spend a lot of time on this, but if you look, a lot of the places around the world where there's conflict, the scarcity of water is a key part of it. Right. And whether it's Sudan or Somalia or the risk here in Iran, it's a huge deal. And there's a whole other geopolitical set of issues around migration and conflict. But you're absolutely right. And I will just to make a pitch for sometimes we lose sight of things in the United States. One of the incredible, bountiful, the many resources we have, whether it's natural gas or rare metals or whatever, one of them is water. I mean, just think about Pennsylvania, for God's sakes, on the Atlantic and Lake Erie. Right. And we have unbelievable water resources. And in this world of next generation technology, water cooling capability is one of the big drivers. And of course, it's the basic needs that you have to live. Right. And Iran's short on it, as you say.
There's no doubt. Let's talk a little bit about, I mentioned off camera, I had the pleasure of some time with one of your staff, Nate Gerace, over the holiday. And he gave me access to a letter that you had posted to Pennsylvania, kind of a summary of your first year. And so let's start with a $14 billion investment by Nippon Steel, Japan, into U.S. Steel. Savings, again, my memory isn't what it used to be, but so I'll get it. I might as well get it right. 11,000 jobs saved, 14,000 more nationally saved, 5,000 construction jobs in the Mon Valley alone. So, obviously you can take a bow. I mean, how's that going? And is that manifesting what you hoped it would?
Yeah. Thanks for bringing those things up. I would say the annual letter was meant to do something that I don't think many politicians do, but CEOs do, as you know, Chuck, which is you gotta tell your shareholders how you did.
And you said that in the letter.
Right. There's no way to BS them, right? So you promise these things, where are you? So what I wanted to try to do was create accountability on myself, but also transparency. And so I had made a bunch of promises during the campaign, and that was my attempt to do it. And I never want to have a show with you without saying the second thing, which I know you know, but for your listeners, and I feel honored to do it. I appreciate the opportunity. I feel really privileged to be able to represent Pennsylvania. So I'm working hard to do a good job, and way to do that's the accountability. I talk about the big five in the letter, and I don't want to steal any of your thunder here.
No, please. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, the big five are five big things that happen that any one of them, if any one of them were to happen in a big year, in any year, you would say, wow, 5 big things happened last year. The first is Nippon. The U.S. Steel was going to shut down the plant in the Mon Valley. So this not only saved those jobs, they're also Nippon committed to a new mill in the Mon Valley and next generation steel. So this sort of saved domestic steelmaking in many ways. It was a huge deal for Pittsburgh. And frankly, President Trump had been opposed to the deal. And I, along with Dan Muser and others, sat down with the president. And I think we were able to convince him that this was in the best interest. It's a huge thing for Pennsylvania. And, it's a great day. The second big announcement was not far from you, Chuck, in Berwick. Right. And Governor Shapiro and I came together and announced that Amazon Web Services, we're going to do a $20 billion of investment in data centers in Pennsylvania. And, I've always said this AI revolution's coming. We can either be the tail or the dog. I think we should lead it and manage this in a way where we make sure electricity prices stay low. I know there's some concerns in local communities. This is a driver of economic growth. This is about jobs. So that creates thousands of jobs. One of those is going to be around Berwick. One's going to be in Bucks County, 2 big data center complexes. The third big announcement was the Energy and Innovation Summit. You said $92 billion. The president came to Pittsburgh. The governor came. We had CEOs from energy, investing, from a big tech. We had outside global investors from Singapore and Abu Dhabi. I mean, it was incredible. And they committed to $50 billion of energy infrastructure, $40 billion of data centers. The fourth one's Hanwha. The South Korean trade minister was in here to speak with me today. $5 billion of new investment in the Philadelphia shipyard. We're going to go from 1 ship a year to 20. This is 5,000 new jobs, welders, pipe fitters, steam fitters. These are incredible jobs that will last for generations, the kind of jobs that we need in next generation technology. And then fifth, unbelievably, a couple of months ago, Westinghouse, the president was there visiting, Japan announced they were going to buy $80 billion worth of nuclear reactors from Westinghouse, much of that manufactured in Western Pennsylvania, in the next 10 years. Those 5 things alone create more than 100,000 jobs, economic growth and opportunity. This is just the beginning, Chuck. If we lean in and make sure Pennsylvania is the place that benefits from the reshoring, the economic opportunity, the skilled labor, the capital we have, the energy, it's going to be a great, brilliant chapter for Pennsylvania.
Well said. And the old lawyer in me have made a few closes to juries. That was a wonderful closing statement for this 2-part show. I'll just add one little comment that, and this is more of a hope, the blitzkrieg of negative publicity from the Democrats. I know you and I have talked about poor, hardworking U.S. Congressman Rob Bresnahan was getting targeted the day he got sworn in. He hadn't even been sworn in yet. And the affordability now, they finally landed on a square that has gotten some traction. They're no longer a threat to democracy anymore. Now it's affordability. And I keep telling people, the things that great, big, beautiful bill did haven't actually taken effect. You're going to start seeing it now. For example, what it means for people's taxes, well, it just applies this year for the first time. They're going to get to see those benefits. And all you've talked about with the investments coming to Pennsylvania, what that's going to do for Pennsylvania's economy and the United States economy. You know, I hope they give the president and you in Congress some time to actually implement the plan that you're doing, but it doesn't happen overnight. That'll be my closing statement.
Yeah, Chuck, you've got it so right. First of all, Rob Bresnahan has been a great member of Congress. He's exactly the kind of guy we need, and his vote has been instrumental. And the people that voted for Rob, voted for Trump, voted for me, are working families. And everything we've been trying to do, whether it's unlock energy, whether it's the child care tax credit, whether it's no tax on tips, whether it's no tax on overtimes, whether it's Social Security, whether it's the Medicaid reforms, all of those things are designed to help working families. And I know a lot of people are hurting. I'll end on this point, but make no mistake, it is working. We are making progress. It's not going to happen overnight. We were handed a disastrous economy where prices went up by 22% and wages fell way behind. Wages are now growing faster than inflation's growing. Inflation's at a 5-year low. But listen, we hear you. We know that electricity prices are still too high. We know that healthcare is still too expensive. We know not enough people are buying houses. But we're in year one of a 4-year agenda, and we've gotten an enormous amount done that people are going to start feeling in their pockets. And I don't, there's a reason that when President Trump wanted to talk about the economy and wanted to make the case of where we are, that he came to Scranton. And the reason is that he recognizes that what happens in Pennsylvania is critically important for the country and Pennsylvania, and everybody's focused on Pennsylvania. So make no mistake that that's front and center for all of us.
Again, Senator, thank you for your time. Very eloquent last word you just had. And I know we'll stay in touch. And good luck and God bless. Thank you for what you're doing for our country.
Thank you, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
It's been a while since I've done a view. But having said that, we need to get back to some views because of what's going on in this country. And my opinions need to be separate, obviously, from the show, and they will take a little time. As you know, I meticulously research them, and certain arguments need to be laid out. But once again, I return to the deleterious effect that the Democratic progressive leftist elites have on our culture and politics. Their noxious virtue signaling and myopic view of morality, like a malignancy, destroys everything it touches. Which brings me to an editorial in the New York Times by David Brooks. In it, he makes reference to 2 studies that concluded that the progressive model of throwing more and more money at problems has not yielded the results they envision. There's a shocker. In one study, the findings clearly reveal that children in one group that have received double the amount of money of other similarly situated children fared no better in language skills and failed to demonstrate any cognitive improvement over children not getting the money. In another group study highlighted in an essay by Kelsey Piper, low-income adults who received an extra $1,000 a month showed no improvement in their psychological well-being or financial security. In an even older study back in 1997 by Susan E. Mayer, a University of Chicago sociologist and behavioral economist, published a book, What Money Can't Buy. She set out to prove that cost transfers would make a big improvement in people's lives. She found out it didn't. I will now quote David Brooks in his editorial referring to Mayer. Quote, "But she was persuaded by the evidence that even if you doubled the family's income, it would have a limited effect on their children's dropout and teenage pregnancy rates. She stated her findings clearly. The results in this book imply that once children's basic material needs are met, characteristics of their parents become more important with how they turn out than anything additional money can buy." End quote. This should not be news to the Democratic progressives. But then again, they have never acknowledged and will never admit the failures of President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society all the way back to the 1960s. Brooks reminds us that you can transfer all the money you want, but without the nurturing and human capital and core family values, you fail to lift people out of poverty. Instead, you get generational cycles of poverty handed down despite all of the government handouts. You would have thought the Democratic progressive elites would have endorsed the studies, or at least begrudgingly acknowledged the findings. But no, of course not. In a response essay to Kelsey Piper, the progressive leftist Matt Bruenig wrote, and I quote, "Cash is the key part of every welfare state in the developed world and absolutely critical in keeping poverty down. As a policy matter, these are mostly solved problems." End quote. In other words, as progressives usually do, just write people checks. I will now quote extensively from David Brooks' editorial. His conclusion is something I wholeheartedly agree with. I'll begin now. Quote, "This is consistent with something I have noticed all my life, the materialistic bent of progressive thought, the assumption that material conditions drive history, not cultural or moral ones. Progressives have often argued that improving schools is mostly about spending more money, that crime is mostly a product of material deprivation. Progressives are quick to talk about money, but slow to talk about the value side of the equation. That's in part for the best of reasons, because they don't want to blame the victims or contribute to the canard that people are poor because they are lazy. But there is something deeper. Progressivism emerges from a different lineage. Karl Marx influenced many people, like progressives, who are not Marxists, because Marx saw the world through materialistic determinism lens, that people's consciousnesses are shaped by their material conditions. Since the dawn of the progressive movement over a century ago, the left has been more technocratic, and social sciences are the narrow doorway that all of human knowledge has to pass through if it's going to influence policymaking. The social sciences are great. I use them all the time. But when overly quantitative, they can misrepresent reality. They see only what can be quantified. They only see masses of people whose data can be tabulated, not unique individuals. Today, most of our problems are moral, relational, and spiritual more than they are economic. There is the crisis of disconnection, the collapse of social trust, the loss of faith in institutions. If you can find some leftists who are willing to spend money fighting poverty, but also willing to promote the traditional values and practices that enable people to rise, you can sign me up for that revolution." End quote. Wonderfully said. You can sign me up for that revolution too, if you can find a few progressives that he's talking about. Thanks for joining us for this edition of the Volpe Report podcast. Be sure to visit our YouTube and Facebook pages for upcoming episodes. You can catch up on the Volpe Report podcast on your favorite podcast provider.